So here's a big question then. Whatever the jurisprudential legal merits of the decision from a legal perspective, and whatever we think about exactly how it's going to be implemented in the future, universities and colleges do have choices to make now. And even though many of them may make very similar kind of isomorphic choices where they all kind of veer in the same direction, we believe around here it's good to debate these things and talk about them. So what should they do? I mean, after this decision, what is the best approach to admissions? Is it strictly test score cutoffs? Is there some kind of balancing that should be in there? I'd love to hear from any of the panelists on that.
I mean, I'll just briefly I'll just say it's actually hard. I mean, like, so everyone, well, not everyone, but it's, I guess, broadly agreed that diversity is good or important or whatever. And a lot of students, when they're deciding what colleges to go for, do actually pay attention to how diverse it is or isn't. We know this on a number of lines, including gender lines. But one of the things that's striking is that a lot of the low-hanging kind of obvious things that people might think would work well turn out to be a lot more complicated than in practice. So for instance, one proposal that's been getting a lot of play, I'll just briefly mention this and then let other people talk, is this idea of selecting people on the basis of their zip codes. But they've done pilots in San Francisco, for instance, for the elite K-12 schools to select people on the basis of zip codes. And what happened in practice actually was the schools actually got more segregated, more racially segregated after they implemented this. And that happened because a lot of the sort of affluent families moved to the very frontier of the areas that were considered as low socioeconomic status so that their kids would get an advantage. And in doing so, they actually crowded out all of the lower income and minority students who would have otherwise, on the basis of their merits, qualified to get in. They couldn't anymore because these wealthy people who have even better preparation moved into the neighborhood and took their spot. And so something like that, like a zip code selection thing, seems like it's something that would be a good way to get socioeconomic diversity. In practice, it actually increased segregation when it was piloted in San Francisco, and I'm sure a similar thing would hold true in Harvard or other places like that. And so that's just something to be mindful of, is a lot of the things that seem like kind of obvious alternatives to get like socioeconomic diversity or things like that, in practice, very complicated.
Yeah.
I'll just add to what Moose is just saying right now on using zip codes as a race-neutral alternative. And Rachel kind of alluded to this earlier, but looking at how race-neutral alternatives of this sort are currently playing out at the selective exam school level in cities like Boston and San Francisco. In Boston, for example, under their current new admissions system that combines admissions test, cumulative GPA, and then also admissions tips based on the zip code within the city. One of the issues that the Boston Public Schools and the school committee have run into is that they have not defined zip code clearly enough. And an example of this is it really shows the difficulties in implementing socioeconomic admissions tips and how not only school districts, but also universities and colleges are going to have to really think hard about what Moose is just saying right now on using zip codes as a race-neutral alternative. And Rachel kind of alluded to this earlier, but looking at how race-neutral alternatives of this sort are currently playing out at the selective exam school level in cities like Boston and San Francisco. In Boston, for example, under their current new admissions system that combines admissions test, cumulative GPA, and then also admissions tips based on the zip code within the city. One of the issues that the Boston Public Schools and the school committee have run into is that they have not defined zip code clearly enough. And an example of this is it really shows the difficulties in implementing socioeconomic admissions tips and how not only school districts, but also universities and colleges are going to have to really think hard about how best they can do this to achieve the sort of socioeconomic diversity they want. So for example, one of the starkest issues that Boston Public Schools has run into is that they base their socioeconomic admissions tip for their 3 exam schools not on median household income, but on percentage of the zip code population living below the poverty line. What this has led to is some of the most affluent neighborhoods in Boston have, for example, one public housing project. And there are several lower middle class neighborhoods that don't have any sort of public housing project. So what this has in effect led to is that the zip codes that are lower to middle class but have no public housing project are effectively shut out of the exam schools because of the socioeconomic admissions tip. Meanwhile, these affluent neighborhoods that just have one housing project, those students, coming from families where the median household income is $200,000, $300,000, are getting preferential treatment in the admissions process for the exam schools. So, this is something that colleges and universities, if they try to go down this route, are going to have to think really hard about because, just speaking, just upfront, a socioeconomic admissions tip for low-income applicants sounds really easy, but what does that in fact mean is something that I think these institutions haven't necessarily grappled with.
I'll just add that I don't think there's going to be a one-size-fits-all response, nor should there be. We have a great diversity among our colleges and universities. They have different missions. They serve different constituencies. And so I don't really think we should expect the same response. And just speaking for a moment to the University of California, we are a state institution. We serve the people of California. So we have some regional constraints that Harvard doesn't have, for example. Working within that, when I was at the University of California, Berkeley, after Proposition 209, I don't think we thought we were going to use covert means. We felt we were a law school. We had to comply with the law. We had to respect the will of the people. On the other hand, we did think there were pedagogical benefits to diversity. So we had to find ways to do more outreach and recruitment, to send a message that we were still a welcoming institution. We also created some marquee programs that we thought would attract people based on their interest in social justice work that would help us to preserve our pedagogical values. And we did that, and we continued to use standardized tests and grades. Now, there is research on what happened at the University of California after 209. And it's interesting, we generally did outreach and recruitment. There was a percentage plan. Different schools adopted different marquee programs. But according to one study, the main driver of diversity at the university has been demographic change. You can't serve the population of high school students in California without having diverse colleges and universities just because of the demographic makeup. And that's why, Berkeley and Michigan both filed an amicus brief, but they're minority white campuses now, but that's because of the demography of the state. I think it's going to be different at Harvard because it is a global university. It brings in people from all over the world. They've had a long tradition of legacy admissions. We as public institutions in California couldn't do that. We didn't have legacy admissions. So we ought to expect diverse strategies and diverse approaches because places have different goals and values and histories and traditions.